and I'm going to let our very first speaker and our vice president of our community and a community builder himself, Patrick Frederickson, come up and talk about today and his presentation. So can we all welcome Patrick, Mr. Builder of Experiences. Oh, that's good. I'll see what
I know, yeah, we'll see what he has to say. Thank you guys for coming. Anybody who was at our event at Gensler last month heard me say that designers suck at giving presentations. I'm a firm believer at that, and so today is us trying to break down why we're bad at giving presentations and why we should actually be good at it. So we've got great speakers, Sam Cabrera from our advisory board, Jack Kafka from our advisory board, Davina Walter from our advisory board, all talking about different aspects of giving presentations. Davina's actually going to be giving her presentation online, talking about how the online format works for giving presentations. Because much of what comes up is figuring out where you're talking kind of changes the way that you're going to present. I pushed the wrong button. So we're going to skip past this because I'm not the design director of Fjord. Cal, we have to talk. I'm a project director at Altitude Design Office, and as Amanda said, I'm the vice president of the chapter for AIJ Los Angeles. Presentations are not soft skills. So I like this quote because, one, Mike Montero cusses, and so that I have more respect for him for doing that. But two, because most of the time when I'm teaching students, they're all about showing me the work, and they're not about telling me about how they got to the work, right? And any of us who have been in the industry for a long time know that we can create the most successful solution in the world, but if we can't actually tell the story to sell it, it doesn't matter, right? So it's very much about salesmanship, it's very much about storytelling. Now, granted, different companies, different cultures, different periods of your career, the types of stories that you're going to be sharing are going to change. But in general, you are going to have to present your work to a boss, to a client, to a peer, something in order to get things to move forward. So just learning how to present your work rather than putting up in the wall and standing back and just listening is a key thing for us to take a look at. The thing is that as designers, we already have the tools to do it. We do this for a living, right? We edit down stories for other people to make their information more accessible by others, and then we forget all of those skills as soon as we're doing it for ourselves, okay? So a good presentation uses all of the information that we already have. It has good rhythm, has good contrast, has good flow, right? Has a nice balance. I'm going to break it down, the good presentation, in terms of the creative brief, which is a tool that we all use, could use, or should use, okay? Creative brief, you define the objective, the client, target market, history, on and on and on. I'm going to go through and break down all these elements of a creative brief in terms of how this affects your presentation. So, what's the objective? There are, depending on who you talk to, 4 to 7 different types of presentations, okay? An informative presentation is, here's a lot of information for you to learn, kind of like what I'm doing right now, right? Sharing information. An instructional presentation, here's how you bake a cake, here's how you play soccer, here's how you use this new tool, here's how a fire drill works. An arousing presentation, is not what you saw Pepsi do on stage at our conference last year. That's what they were trying to do. They were trying to arouse, they were trying to do something exciting, but an arousing presentation, that's the Steve Jobs kind of thing. That's the big wow moment, right? A persuasion presentation, hire me, right? Buy my work. Use this item, right? That's a persuasive. And a decision presentation. These are all the things that we have on the table. What are we going to do to move forward? I've made my argument, we're going to see what happens next. So knowing the objective of your presentation is critical because that's going to frame the way that you tell your story. Understand the client, right? Presentations happen in many, many ways. Public speaking is a presentation. We're not going to get into the ideas that everybody's afraid of public speaking, blah, 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 blah. No, if you go in and you do an interview, you're giving a presentation, right? You're selling your work. If you are responding to an RFP, you're giving a presentation. If you are pitching the final solution to the CEO or to City Hall, you're giving a presentation. And if you're standing up on stage, at TEDx, you're giving a presentation. But who invited you is going to kind of shape what it is you have to deliver. If somebody invites you to talk, you have to understand what they want you to present. If you're selling yourself, you have to understand what you want to present. So your client shifts, right? Just like our client shifts when we're working on any other types of project. And who cares? Who are the people in the audience that we're speaking with? Okay. If you're speaking to a bunch of students, right, then you're going to shape and craft your information in a certain way. If you're speaking to a bunch of peers, you're going to be able to use a lot of inside baseball terminology, right? People are going to understand what's going on. And if you're talking to a manager versus an independent contributor versus a CEO versus the financial person, they're all going to have different pain points and touch points that they want to hear you address. So understanding exactly who you're speaking to, that's your target market in a presentation. That's how you sell it, right? If you say, oh, they didn't get it, don't blame them. You didn't understand the questions that they wanted to hear. A manager, they want to understand how what you're presenting is going to help them achieve the goals that their executive wants. The executive wants to know, how are you going to hit my bottom line, right? The designer, the worker, they want to know, how am I going to get my job done and how is this going to work better, right? So each of those stories is going to be different, understanding who the target market is. And if you're talking to, a stadium full of people, they just want to be wowed, right? They have a completely different interest in mind. So understand that market, shape your conversation that way. Where have we been? What's all the information that's coming up? Where are we at this stage in presentation? Is this a brand new launch, right? Am I telling you about something that is already out in the world? If I'm going to come up here and talk about, give a new presentation on here's all the new apps that are available for InDesign this year, well, chances are you already know a lot about what InDesign already does, so I don't have to give kind of the background of it. I can just say, here's what you've been asking for, here's what happens moving forward. If I'm going to come up here and give a talk about, oh, here's this, hydroelectric car that floats on air. Nobody knows anything about what that technology is, how it can affect. So I'm going to have to introduce a lot of new terms to you, right? So know the history of where people are coming from, what they know, where they are on this stage of the conversation. Being prepared, this is something that we see a lot of people fail on, right? And something that I think we're going to hit a little bit today. More and more, we're giving presentations online. We're having meetings with people across the country, right? Trying to manage a space in a digital environment is a lot different than me sitting right here and talking to you. I can look around, I can, catch people's eyes, I can kind of read the room, I can begin to affect what's going on. When you're having a phone presentation, totally different. You get those awkward pauses, people talking over themselves. Online presentations, GoToMeetings and Zooms, BlueJean meetings, you can see people trying to talk, it's a little bit better. Talking on stage, how big is your deck, how big is the information? One of the things that we see very, very often is people are printing, they're building decks for printing scale versus for presentation scale, right? Just a general rule of thumb, if you're building a presentation, it's going to go online, at least 30-point type. Just stay with that and then go above. Okay. All the fields. With the competition. I was on a good roll. I just right? All right, what are people trying to get out of this? Okay. The competition when you're giving a presentation, right? The competition is does the CEO, are the people in the room, have they already bought into the product that you're trying to sell them? If you've been hired to, design a new identity, design a new system for an organization, right? You go through and you present to the team, you make edits, you go to the next step and you present to a bigger team, you make more edits, but then at some point you have to present to a decision maker, okay? So what is it that they're bringing to the table that you need to address? Is this something that they've invested in? Is this something that they don't really care about? Is this something that they have competing priorities that are trying to be addressed? What are all the feelings that students are looking for, right? If you're presenting to a classroom, what are all the feelings and things that your team is looking for if you're presenting to your art director, to your creative director, right? Understanding, trying to wrap your head around the goals that each of these individuals have is really what you're trying to do is give them the gifts so that they can speak better and they can champion what you're doing. the end of the day, as designers only work if there's an angel above them that is advancing the work that they're doing, right? We can create the best work in the world, but somebody has to believe in it, okay? So you're trying to give somebody else the tools so that they can talk about the work that you're doing. Respect. The audience is smart. Don't talk down to them, right? Don't belittle them. Don't make fun of them. Recognize that you may be the smartest person in the room about the one thing you're talking about at that moment, but somebody else is the smartest person in the room about something else. So respect them, sit back, shut up, and listen sometimes, right? Hear what's going on, hear what they have to say, hear the questions that are coming up and respond to those, right? But don't talk down to people. Don't let your ego get big just because you're up on stage presenting. And respect the time, right? If somebody says you have a 10-minute presentation, make a 7-minute presentation. If somebody says you have a 60-minute presentation, make a 60-minute presentation, right? Because they're paying you or they're carving out that time for 60 minutes of experience, right? Show up on time, be prepared, have respect for the work that you're doing, because what you're doing is you're giving somebody a gift. The support. So how do you frame a story, right? There's many ways to frame stories. I'm not going to get into this. Presentations are storytelling, but heart, head, hand, heart, right? What are my feelings, right? What is the issue that we're trying to solve? That's the heart, right? What is the emotion that's going into it? Head, what is all the stats? What's all the data? What's all the information that is informing how we're going to solve that problem? Hand, here's the tool. These are the options. This is what you can hold. This is what you can move forward with. And then go back to heart. We were trying to solve this problem. We proved it. We said, here's how we can move forward. Now here's what we can do to continue proving that and make those decisions to move on. There's always a rhythm to a good presentation. You don't want it just to ramble on. There's many, many tools you can look at. This is a nice tool a friend shared with me recently. There's an option. The mandatory. At some point, somebody doesn't like red. I don't like red. It doesn't look good on me, right? So don't design a t-shirt for me that's red, even if that's the best solution for this product. At some point, you're dealing with personal preference. They don't like red, okay? Other times you're dealing with personal preferences like, oh, it has to go through this team, or oh, it has to fit within this box, or oh, here's all the legal limitations that need to come into play. There's always a mandatory in the presentations. Be aware of those, right? Listen to the feedback that came from the presentations before. Don't ignore them, right? Show this helps to support the respect. It also helps to support, just move forward, right? You're working with somebody in a team, right? You're showing up to an interview, you want to look professional, right? These are all kind of mandatory things that you need to be aware of. And finally, just say it. Okay? I think that this is finally. Oh no, this is not just finally. This is almost the final thing. Say it. One of my biggest pet peeves when it comes to presentations is people that just keep talking, right? Our job as designers is to get rid of all the noise and just produce the communication. We just produce the product. We just say that one thing, right? So everything that we do is edit down. So edit down your presentation, make the point, and shut up. Just say it, move on. Finally, what is the product, right? Public speaking is one of the things that people get the most fearful of, right? It's more fearful than getting bitten by a shark and snakes, all sorts of things. There's stats and slides you can go find about that. People say, oh, I'm nervous about public speaking, right? No. Well, that nervousness is excitement, right? As soon as you shift that to, instead of saying, I'm scared, I'm nervous, I don't know what to do, and say, wow, I'm really excited about this. That's just a tiny little mental switch, okay? And it's the same emotion, it's the same feeling. Nervousness and fear and excitement, they're the same thing that you're walking into. But be excited about it, because what you are doing when you give a presentation is you're sharing a gift, okay? You're up there and you're giving a performance, right? Basically, everybody knows what you're about to say, right? If somebody has invited you in for an interview, They know that you're going to talk about your past accomplishments, blah, 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 blah. Here's all your great design. They want to hear how you're going to say it, right? If you're getting up on stage to reveal a new thing, great, so we're going to see a new iPhone, or we're going to see a new something from Apple. Maybe we don't even know what that something is, but we know that it's going to be a new something, it's going to be wonderful, we want to see how they present it, okay? So you're giving a gift, you're giving a presentation, you're up on stage. Just be excited, have a good time with it, and move on. I started at the beginning saying presentation is not a soft skill, right? Warren Buffett, I don't really know what he does for a living except that he makes a lot of money. And if you make a lot of money, then people quote you, so that's good. Hone your communication skills. If you want to make more money, hone your communication skills, right? You can't sell your product if you can't talk about it. You can't sell yourself if you can't talk about it. So practice, get into it, look for the tools, and as designers, as creatives, we have all of these tools in our vocabulary already. We just need to apply them to ourselves. And then I'm just going to leave at the end. These are a couple of resources that have affected me. I also was lucky that I had good mentorship in how to talk. But Make a Stick, incredible book on how to talk to people. Start with Why, great philosophy on how to frame your arguments. The Laws of Simplicity, edit down, get down to the right way of doing things, and just show people how it's going to happen. And Resonate, basically anything by Nancy Duarte. She's all about giving good presentations because she hates sitting at conferences watching people give bad presentations. So that's what I've got. And coming up next, thank you, we're going to shift to Davina Walter, who is going to be presenting online. So give me just a moment as we figure out how to make this shift. I think Amanda's going to come up.
Thank you, Patrick. Sorry, Davina.
Davina, I'll put the duck online for you. Yeah, that stays there. There we go. All right, now when you go to full screen.
Can you guys see, is there a glare on the TV? You guys okay?
No, that's good.
That's good. Okay. I think you did this.
There we go. Now Davina's there.
I'll flip her around so people can see her. 1 second, I mean, you're not big enough yet.
I think that might be the biggest that she goes inside. There it is, right here.
For real?
Oh, wait, there's a little thing. Can you bring that up here?
This is going to be embarrassing because everybody's going to see my really messy desktop. And a very, very small Davina. All right, because I'm going to apologize because I cannot make Davina bigger for some reason.
Hey, Amanda, if you look at the top of the bar, where there's the big square right on the side.
Oh, here. Everybody say hi to Davina. I put you on the big thing real quick. Everybody, this is Davina. She's going to be talking to everybody today. I'm switching her back to the small one so you can see her presentation. And I'm going to apologize for my really messy desktop. But now you know who's talking. We are very excited to have Davina. She's kind of amazing. I'm going to let her say a little bit about herself and then talk about her presentation. Davina, I'm going to put the microphone on the computer. We're very high tech today.
Say something.
Hello!
You guys hear her?
Everyone hear me? All right, we'll go with that. Hello! Hello? Uh-oh, is my audio not working? Can you hear me, anyone?
We can hear you. Can you hear us?
Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see your screen. It's dark.
Hold on, wait a minute. Chat is getting everybody. Right? Tech is fallible. It is impossible to know what tech might do when we're giving an online presentation. So a little bit about me. Let's start at the beginning so that you can better understand who who I am and why presenting online is critical to my work. I am a designer. I'm also faculty at USC's Iovine Young Academy. I'm a community mentor, and I am a mom. So, first up, for those of you who don't know me, I have to come clean and share that I'm a total nerd and a bit of a goofball. I love dipping into new material and learning from the experts around me. Part of this is connecting with folks around the globe, and hopping on a plane to collaborate doesn't always work. So online presentations and meetings are a critical component of my work. With nearly 20 years of experience designing global installations for major venues, I have a unique background and skill set to share. My work takes me around the world. For example, right now, 2 of my main partners are based in Scotland and in Ottawa, Canada, not super close, and a whole mess of time zones to navigate. Simply put, there would be little collaboration and major lags in communication if it were not for online platforms. I have had the fortune to see how design, business, and tech, and build all come together to create unique, interactive, and educational experiences in the world of exhibition design. Which brings me to my latest adventure as a full-time professor with USC's new school, founded by Jimmy Iovine and Dr. Dre. The program is rooted in the idea that design, business, and tech should be taught in tandem, not in isolation. So here I get to share my experiences and continue to learn in an incredible multidisciplinary environment. In this picture, you can see the master's students and myself on a professional practice residential at IDEO in San Francisco. Iovine Young's Master's in Science is conducted online, which gives me additional time to hone my skills in the online meeting environment. Shameless plug, we're also ramping up to release the on-the-ground Product Design Master's program starting fall 2020. Please share. Super excited about this. I'm also super grateful that my role with Iovine Young, while it's full-time, it's crafted to allow me to leave for periodic exhibition installations, and that they support the small agency that I've created starting in 2018 when I left the in-house museum in Dublin. So let's get to the good stuff. Let's take a few looks at some tips and tricks for online presentations. Now, a few mistakes did not a fiasco make. Professionals throw them off casually, but file them away to reinvent as an endearing antidote in later presentations. Make them part of the performance, put them behind you, and keep going whatever happens. This is Ray Bonetti, and she says in her book, Speak Out, Don't Freak Out. Let's take a minute to consider what that means in the world of online presentations, right? So, to start, we need to set up. Let's get our ducks in a row. Confirm the details. This seems like a no-brainer. But do you really have the correct application loaded up on your laptop and ready to go? Do you have the video conference login? And have you confirmed that you're signed into the correct account for the call? This happens more often than not. People log in and they actually are using a different email address than the one that they've been invited to. So make sure you have the meeting info, but also know how to share your screen, control your audio, and manage your video. Because let's be honest, everybody has to sneeze from time to time. As we saw a few moments ago, the most common mistake I see in online presentations is not confirming that the tech is working in advance. And then you've got to trust the tech. Nothing is more jarring to your narrative than asking if the tech is working, right? Hello, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Nobody likes doing things over and over again, except when it comes to a great presentation. So run a dress rehearsal, know your script, see that if it disappears in a sea of windows on your screen, you can still produce an ace performance. Now let's get to the juicy part, the pitch. Let's get our act in gear. Once you've jumped in and you make sure to set a tone, just like you would in any good presentation in person, what would you do differently online? The easiest way to do this is to introduce yourself. When online, share a picture of yourself. It's incredibly important that the audience can see who's speaking for most of your presentation. Like right now, I'm a little box, right? So me sharing my picture at the beginning of the presentation allows you to see who I am. Also know your audience. At in-person presentations, you can usually quickly scan the room and see how your material is landing. In the online arena, you need to become adept at connecting and creating a community through the platform. To do this, ask folks to sign in and use their names and share a video capture of themselves. Make this part of your meeting invite. It's really difficult when we don't know who is who in a video conference, right? Caller number 6, no different than caller number 4. And if you're not able to see everybody at once, use that video. Make sure to scroll through the video feed boxes to see who you're speaking with and to be able to engage with them, right? Maybe somebody's taking a break or is getting a little sleepy. You're able to call those people out and re-engage them if you use that video feed. So the video is also a great opportunity to use an icebreaker. Get everybody onto the same page by working, creating a silly activity, and embrace being human for a minute on this technology. Make a connection. All right. While you may not be making the big bucks as the entertainer of the hour, tell us a story and make sure it's a good one. Make sure that you're creating a clear and concise narrative, one that your audience can follow and be part of. At an in-person presentation, you get the benefit of not only being able to see your audience, but also being able to hear them. For example, right now, I can't hear you. Most folks will go on mute while others are presenting, unless you have specifically asked for them to interact and engage with you while you're presenting. So it's really important to be okay with the silence that follows those regular opportunities to laugh, snort, or cry out, "Hell yes," in affirmation to your story. Keep in mind that these pauses can also be a good time for you to be able to scan your attendees in that video box. And encourage your audience to use the tool too. Check out the chat, right? For example, I was chatting to Patrick while he was speaking, saying, "You look great in red." Encourage your audience to use it, especially if your presentation would benefit from it. This allows for you to create relevance in the online community. Keep it short and sweet. Like any good body of educational information, know what your timeline with your audience is. Our bodies get wiggly, our attention span wanes, and we need to know how long we can effectively share information, right? I like to try and stick to no more than 10 minutes. 6 minutes is even better because I get wiggly too. Remember that anything can happen online. It's true. Remember this guy from BBC? His sweet family rolling in while he was alive? Be prepared, and if things go sideways, roll with it. I've had a cat come and jump at the screen. I've had children yelling like crazy in the background, and the mailman being curious at the window. Through all of these, I've always managed to keep it professional and formal. Take, for example, this poor guy, a political analyst who got caught pantless while conducting a Skype interview on Al Jazeera by his own son. His own son, y'all, called him out and put it out on the internet. Then he was there sitting with no pants on. So to sum it all up, let's get back to our design roots and consider. The goal of a designer is to listen, observe, understand, sympathize, empathize, synthesize, and glean insights that enable him or her to make the invisible visible. We strive to be infused with learnings, be aware of our users, and understand the market, and be vigilant of opportunities to constantly improve. This includes in the online arena. Thank you.
I'm going to flip you really quick, Dina, so everybody can see your lovely face again. I think this is what I'm doing. Yay! Round of applause, and now we can see her. Dina has to skedaddle, so she won't be around for our Q&A. Does anybody have a question they would like to ask Davina before we let her go? No?
Hey, Davina, what's your favorite presentation that you've seen?
My favorite presentation?
Yes.
Oh man, anything that has a sense of humor about it. I think when we get so uptight and concerned about sharing our ideas in a very buttoned-up format, we lose our audience, right? We stop connecting with people on a human level. And that puts a barrier between the material that we're presenting and those that we're sharing with. Hey, I do want to add to all of you there, when I was putting this together, I realized that I've used over 25 online platforms. 25! And a lot of them are pretty crappy. So figure out what the online tool is that you actually prefer to use, and make sure that you can kind of worm your way into your community or perhaps your company with that tool. For example, I really like using Zoom.
Kelly in the back.
How long do you think it took you, give us an estimate, until you felt comfortable presenting online?
How long did it take you to feel comfortable presenting online? Estimate, how long do you think it took you?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think for me, honestly, I like presenting online better than I do in person. Because I have little things that I do when I'm presenting in person that I don't do when I'm presenting online. Do y'all have a little crutch when you present? You know what I'm talking about? You got it.
Yes.
Right? For me, when I present in person, I usually have like a little piece of paper or something that I'm fiddling with in my fingertips, or the remote. And I don't tend to do that when I'm working online. And like anything else, it just took repeating the process over and over again to get more comfortable with it. And part of that was trusting the tech.
I think you had a question?
Oh, I was going to ask what the preferred applications were.
Oh, besides Zoom, do you have other preferred applications?
GoTo is a great one. WebEx is a great one. Let's see. Japster can be pretty good as well.
My name is Sam Cabrera. I'm an Associate Director of Experience at AMP Agency, and I'm also a professor, Cal Poly Pomona, and maybe SMC, who knows. I've also been a part of AMJLA for the last 10 years as a program director, volunteer, a lot of stuff, and now I'm on the advisory board. And it's actually really exciting because I don't know most of you guys, and I've been around for 10 years, so that actually is really great. So I actually want to, going back, talk about presentations from the lessons I've learned and tell you some stories that kind of led me to those lessons. It's actually been very validating to have the last two presenters kind of speak to some of my points, so cool, validating. Story one, I have to tell you, I hate presenting over a phone. I'm much better in person. I can read your visual cues. I can tell if I'm being funny or not very quickly. And I would have to say that in my career, with remote presentations, I have found the phone to be my mortal enemy. So I want to tell you a story about a project that I had recently where the client was situated in Boston, which is great, like awesome. I get to work with people in Boston, and it was a really great company to work for, but as I started to present the work online, the relationship wasn't working, and we had to kind of have a come to Jesus about the entire project, and we kind of came up with a couple of problems. So why remote didn't work for us was, first of all, our acoustics sucked. Like our office is very nice, but our conference room echoes, you can barely hear anything, and so I'm literally screaming into the phone as I'm presenting because they can't hear me, and so we literally weren't communicating with each other, and we almost bought them a phone, so just to tell you how terrible things were. Also, screen sharing made our work look terrible. First of all, if you can imagine, you know, certain, you know, corporations, they don't have like the nicest, coolest tech and stuff, and so they're like standing where you guys are, and I'm presenting something that's, you know, being projected over there. So it was a disaster, and so they kept telling us to make things bigger, and you know, we almost bought someone a laptop because they kept saying the gray wasn't contrasting enough, and so like it was just a mess. And also, you know, I think this is the biggest reason is we just didn't know each other. So they had never met me, they met my boss, but they didn't know me, and so here I am presenting to them, and I sound young on the phone, and so I'm sure that they were like, who's this person that is telling us to do all this stuff? So we couldn't engage properly, right? And so what I did, which was a little bit nuts, is I flew over 50,000 miles last year to Boston, and I would travel there, we would meet in person, which was crazy, we would eat lunch together, we would grab coffee, actually worked in their offices. It was extreme, and I would say that it was taxing, but what ended up happening was we got to know each other, they trusted me much more, I was able to be funny in front of them, and then, you know, they would actually laugh, and it was great, and we got the project back on track, and we ended up with really great work, so yay. So I would say that the biggest lesson that I learned from that is it's more work, but you have to invest early in person to build a relationship before you start doing remote work. So anytime we start a new project, we have like a travel budget. Actually, I'm starting one that's in St. Louis now, and they slashed the budget in half. Whatever, you know, it's more important to build that relationship, and it's just so much easier. It's like greasing the wheels at that point. So story 2. I was once in Korea on a pitch. It was this big client, and I was very nervous already to present to, you know, an international crowd that kind of knew English and kind of didn't. And, you know, I think we all are very well aware of the situation with our dongles. We have so many dongles here, and I had all of them, and we were just like, we were prepared for everything, and they told us it would be totally fine. They're like, oh yeah, you know, we have like a really great office, and you can just like, you know, present or whatever. They had this massive custom presentation wall, and it was gorgeous. And it was in a conference room that actually it extended out into a garden. Like it was like insane. It was incredible. But problem is they were PC, and we had cool keynote animations and motion and video, and they're like, yeah, just like put your USB into the computer that's attached to this. And we're like, ooh, it's not gonna work. You know, I guess like we were there like 45 minutes before, like we were doing all the right things. And then they're like, oh, you know what, actually we're just gonna plug into the HDMI directly in there. But the custom housing of this beautiful building, like maybe allowed my hand to get in there. And so like, you can imagine us just like, you know, frantically trying to get into this thing, and we ended up deconstructing their housing entirely. So like, you can imagine like, it was us and the CEO and like a screwdriver, and we're like taking out that housing at the bottom, hoping that we can, you know, connect to this thing. And anyways, in the end, it didn't work. So they had one of these, actually looks very much like this, a little triggered, and we just put it in front of the nice housing and the nice presentation, because, yeah. So anyways, the moral of the story is keep calm. Project, I tend to, when things go wrong, pretend that it's not happening, and just be like, oh yeah, that's the typo, good one, you caught it, or whatever. You just have to be as prepared as you can, obviously, but then just like keep calm and, you know, pretend that it's like, keep your poker face up. Because if they know that you're nervous or that you made a mistake, they're gonna start to question you and what you're trying to sell, and you don't want to detract from that. So, lesson learned. Story 3. This story is about a brand new designer at her first job. So this is me graduating from Cal Poly Pomona, super excited to go into the world as a designer. And I soon realized that, oh, and I should also mention, I love presenting. It's like 30% of my job. It's the best job ever. I think I love it because I was in theater in high school and in college, so like it super doesn't scare me to forget my mind on stage. But I noticed that like as a young designer, I would do the work, and then someone would take that away and then present it. And then they would come back when we would have recap meetings like a day or two later. And I remember being so frustrated because I actually would beg, please, let me call into the presentation. I won't even announce myself. Like, I'll just hear, I just want to listen to the feedback. I just want to hear the reaction, like, that they love it. I want to hear it firsthand. And I begged. And they were like, oh, you know, you're too junior, blah, blah, blah. So then I finally wore them down to allow me to just sit in the meeting. And I was like, I'll be a wallflower. I'll be on the wall. Like, you guys won't even know I'm there. This photo is a selfie that I took in 2014 of my first client meeting. So I went from this like bright-eyed, you know, nervous person, afraid of talking to executives and, you know, people on the other side who were, you know, much older than me at the time, and I had a lot of complexes about that, to, through experience, becoming battle-hardened for anything that could happen in a presentation. And so what I would say is the biggest lesson that I learned is that by seeing firsthand how my bosses, you know, handle tough situations early on, or how they smoothed over sort of like, you know, some conflicts, I was able to learn so much more from that before I even got to present myself. And some of my favorite things that I learned from my bosses were, you know, active listening. So my current boss is amazing at this. Like, we're sitting in a meeting and there's like 12 stakeholders. This is the first time they've had an opportunity to talk about this, and they're just like kind of going off topic and going back and forth. He listens to all of this, synthesizes it in his brain, and then he spits it out and says, okay, so what I'm hearing is, and he spits it out into like a logical statement. And it's amazing. And what ends up happening when you actively listen is that it allows for your client to feel confidence in that what you're saying and how you understand their problem, like that they're heard, essentially. So that's what I learned. And then, you know, storytelling, blah, blah, blah. I actually asked my other boss to text me some tips and tricks. And so I'll read them to you because they're pretty amazing. So his process is browse, brainstorm your topic, and post-it note all of the random and interesting themes that is striking to you. Create an outline. I like to write mine as though I'm saying it. It takes longer, but it makes for a story versus a set of images I'm describing. And so he does this in Evernote. Read through it aloud. Does it sound like a good story? Now make slides. Don't get caught up in how stuff looks yet. Read it out loud, again, as though you're presenting it. And then you can make it beautiful. And then he also has some other things. He said, pose questions. People love that because they get to guess the answer before you tell them. If presenting design work, don't describe it. Don't describe what people are saying. Explain the story behind it. Put your words into the notes pane and leave the slides for the images, as people read faster than you speak. And then he also recommended the book, The Perfect Pitch. Yeah. And then he told me good luck. So it's pretty nice. So in the end, I think what I'm trying to say is the lesson that I learned is presentations can be a part of mentorship. So if you're a design manager, if you're a design leader, bring your juniors to let you see how this works, and so that they're better prepared and that they learn something through observation, not just through us like with a PowerPoint presentation on how to do things. Like the action and observation is so helpful, and it also means so much to the junior designers who just want to hear that the client loves it firsthand. Yeah. So, anyways, thank you very much.
Everybody give Sam a round of applause. Everybody give a round of applause for John.
I think I just did a curtsy. That was spontaneous. Well, I've always wanted to come up with like some sort of app or solution that helps you deal with awkward technical moments like we just had, because in Sam's story, it comes up all the time, constantly. There's always like, everything's broken, you go to the client, the dongles are wrong, and there's got to be a solution for that. So if anyone has any ideas, let us know. Let's see. So my name is Jod. I work for a design firm called Fjord, which is part of Accenture Interactive. My role there is group design director, and I lead our design practice. I also run a capability within Fjord called Fjord Evolution. And it's one thing that I do love is Fjord is really committed to ongoing learning in our organization, as long as you hit your chargeable targets. But that gives me the opportunity to go to other studios around the country and then to train them. But it's interesting, something about training, every studio within our network is slightly different. And so I love what Sam was saying about listening, because that is so profound in terms of how it impacts our work. So when I go to another studio, I want to listen to them. I want to listen to what they need to learn, rather than coming in with some sort of assumption. And that principle applies to your clients too, as well. I'm going to go ahead and say that I look pretty good in red. I'm just going to go out there with it. But, okay, so you're probably having a little principle fatigue, and we're going to go through a few more. These are principles, but they're also kind of Jod-like learnings that just went away. There we go. Okay. So your slides are a dance partner. What does this mean? Big part of my job is reviewing decks. Like they call it the swoop and poop role. I try not to poop, but just swoop. And so I'm walking in and I'm reviewing decks all the time. And my role as a creative director, right, is to be a thought partner to my fellow designers, right? Is to get them to find their power. I want them to be the star when they're presenting. But in order to do that, my role is to help them find their blind spots. And one of the most common mistakes I see is people putting incredibly beautiful slides together, right? And just focusing on the slide where, the slide where, the slide where. And then they get up and present and they start reading what's on the slide, right? And they're turning and they're facing the slide. And they're like, do you think people are coming to this so they can see your deck? So your deck, by saying it's a dance partner, it's ambient, right? It's the thing that lives in the background. Another way of saying this is, you have to be more interesting than your slides, which is hard, right? That's why my slides today are very uninteresting. But no, I'm just kidding about that. But no, there's a truth to that, because people are coming to listen to you, right? And so all the things that you've heard from previous presenters around presenting and preparation, I've done a lot of presentations, and I still get nervous, and I just accept it, right? Like, that nervousness is excitement. But I know that they're coming to see me. They're not coming to see the deck, right? And so I meticulously prepare, except for today, but I meticulously prepare when I'm in front of a client. I know exactly what each slide is supposed to trigger, and if I don't prepare like that, then the slide takes over the conversation, and that's not what should happen. It should live in the background. So I love that Patrick talked about the Nancy Duarte book, Resonate. I read it early on, and it was so interesting. A lot of design books are kind of boring, to be honest. I mean, I read a lot of fiction, so they're too instructive. They're like, here's how to do things. Like, her book is also about telling stories, right? And stories are driven by contrast. What does that mean? Well, there's the world of today and there's the world of tomorrow. Every presentation is about a preferred future. So you have to contrast what is the shared understanding of the problem today as it is and what that better future looks like. Every presentation is about that. I don't care. If it's not about that, it's not worthy of being a presentation. So you have to, that's why all that preparation that Sam's boss was getting on taking notes, understand a lot of that note taking is coming in and saying, yeah, we heard you, and we understand that the world looks like this today. But I'm here to tell you about a better future. There's something that's going to happen that's going to be better than what you have today. So it's not just a simple, that dynamic plays throughout the pacing of the deck, right? You're always going in and saying, okay, in this chapter, where's the contrast? In this chapter, where's the contrast? And anyone who studies aesthetics can also tell you that beauty is also about contrast. So that's principle number 2. Whoops, we're going to talk about that. This is a big one. Your audience has to be the star of the show, right? You think that I'm the star of the show right now, but I'm not. You are. This is about you and you becoming the best that you can be, right? I'm just a midwife or something. I'm a mediator, whatever I am. I'm less important than the audience. And so if you put that into a client context, you have to make your client believe in something. Your client is the hero. Has anyone heard of the hero's journey and Joseph Campbell? And it absolutely applies to this. You have to make them believe that they're going to find the thing that they lost or the thing that needs to be found, right? So make them the star. You know, I come in, sometimes I look at people applying for jobs, and as you get more seniors, sometimes you have to give a presentation about yourself. And early on in my career, I would be like, well, I'm John, and this is everything I've done, and I'm so cool. And then when I got the job at Fjord, I had to give a presentation to like all the leaders of Fjord. It was kind of scary. And then I said, you know what, I don't want to start this off talking about myself. I want to talk about them. And I kind of just took a risk because I knew Fjord in LA was kind of a new thing. And I was like, Fjord practices something called service design as a big part of our capabilities. And I basically said, you guys probably don't have a lot of expertise in service design in LA. You know, and I kind of did a little backlog intel on that. But I was right? And I said, I made them believe that if I join, I'm going to help you get that expertise, even though I was not an expert myself. So turning your audience into the protagonist. A lot of agencies go in and they talk about themselves. They're like, well, we're so great. These are all the case studies we have. Now let's talk about you. So I suggest invert that and make them the star. Make them know that you understand who they are and what they need. I keep hitting the wrong button. Okay. Facts are not messages. So a lot of mistakes that I see are people going onto like eMarketer, right? Grabbing a graph, saying, look, 9 out of 10 people switch devices, and you know, like they're just throwing facts on a slide. And before I got into design, I was actually, I was a journalist. And I quickly learned that facts serve as evidence for a larger narrative, right? And without getting into the slippery slope of fake news today, what that means, there is, you have to curate your facts. You know, in design, it's both about cognition, it's about action, and it's about emotion. And sometimes I've seen designers not come with a balanced approach. They might make a great pitch, they tell a great story, but there's no evidence in there to amplify and support that story. And I've seen the inverse be true. I've seen them go in with a bunch of desktop research and no emotional impact. There's no point of view, there's no narrative. So, I do think the weight of emphasis is to tell a story and to have a perspective, but to use facts as a way to appeal to the left brain, and then use your storytelling abilities to appeal to the right brain. So when you're looking at a fact and you're pruning it in your deck, it's like, how does this amplify my perspective and my point of view? That should be the criteria. This time I did it right. Anticipate the resistance. So this was a really good thing when I really started to embrace this. Start, not only just know your audience with it, which other smart people have mentioned, but when thinking about knowing your audience, know where the guns are, right? Know where you could get ambushed. That's so important. So you'll see, if you were working with me, I'd say, who's gonna be there? I'd say, now give me some intel on those people. Which one of these stakeholders that we're presenting to is skeptical of what we're doing? What are the agendas in the room? It's almost like I'm a CIA operative, right? And I'm trying to get a dossier, like a behavioral dossier, on every single person that I'm presenting to. Because I want to know exactly how they see the world. And when we create our presentation, it has to at least anticipate their mental model of the world. So that is something that can completely derail your whole approach. You might think it completely makes sense. You might look at the brief and the SOW and say, look, we're doing what we're contracted for. What's the problem? Doesn't matter. That guy who also put in, half the money has a very separate agenda. So how are you going to resonate with him, even though the three other people in the room maybe see it different? So you really have to play psychologist on this. And really, this is true. I think Maya Angelou said this. We practice so hard on what we're going to say, and none of this is really about slideware tips. It's really about the act and process of presentation. But you want to make someone feel something. You want to be relatable. You want to be someone that they feel they can talk to. And you want to also kind of be yourself, whatever that means. But if you can do all those things, you might make an emotional connection with people, And another way of putting this, so I'm also a professor and I teach, and there's a really interesting pyramid about how people retain what you say. And at the very bottom of the pyramid is talking. People retain 5% of what you say, basically, everyone. So if you're giving a lecture, I expect maybe you'll get 5% of this, and that's fine. And as you go up the pyramid, like when you are demonstrative, and I give you examples of things, if I put a deck together in front of you guys in real time, which would probably be really awkward, you might retain like 45%. The most interesting thing is at the very top is when you teach. When you teach other people, you retain 95% of the material, which is really interesting because you internalize it, right? And so that's why, I also have a certificate in Kundalini Yoga. I just like collecting certificates. And the founder of that particular teaching said, the best way to learn is to teach. So I really encourage people, it's another way of saying exposure therapy too. Just get up here in front of people. The more you do it, right, maybe the nerves will never go away, but you'll find this kind of joy in it, each time. Because you are trying to give something to someone. You are trying to connect with other human beings. And that is a beautiful, wonderful thing, right? And you're trying to help people. And when you think about what design communication is about, you know, I think it was Herbert Simon, I said this earlier, designers are about describing what a preferred future is. They're also about translating abstract ambiguity into forms, right? And Mike Montero also says, designers are the difference between what is and what ought to be, right? And this is part of how you get there. Because, you know, I'd say about 60% of what we do at Fjord is communicating the design, right? And collaborating with people, right? The days of a designer kind of going behind cloistered walls and working on deliverables and saying, here's the deliverable, are kind of gone, because the nature of complexity, the complexity of the problems that we're working on require collaboration with our clients. So this has made presentations and communication about design even more important. And that's about it.
I'm just going to ask a couple of questions, but I really want to hear what people out here have to say. But the first question, same questions that I asked to Davina, is Jod and Sam. What is the favorite present? Like, what's the best presentation you've seen? What's your favorite presentation that you've seen?
Well, I mean, what comes to mind in terms of a presentation that's created human impact? I mean, you have to obviously think of the Al Gore movie, right? With Inconvenient Truth. I mean, that was basically a guy giving a presentation for the movie. And before that movie came out, whether it was a movie or not, right? You know, people didn't care about climate change. And so that, both his presentation and the slideware, which was truly not filled with 500 words on them, created really dynamic change. So I do think of that comes to mind.
Yeah. You know what? I think my favorite thing is like when people take, I'm really into like movies and TV. I watch a lot of it. I think one of my favorites thus far is like The Big Short, where they take like a really complex thing that most people didn't understand, injected a lot of humor and narrative, facts, and then just made it something that was so digestible that, like, you know, I watched it and I was horrified and I learned a lot. So yeah, so whenever we're able to kind of like, you know, put on a play, I guess, that's the most impact for me.
I'm going to go with anything that Alton Brown does, because he basically does that. It's like public history, but how do you break down food into a way that's enjoyable, that's a story, there's so many ways that he lets you like engage with Italian food, you know, with chicken parmesan, right? With how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and yet it's the most exciting thing, and it hasn't been on the air in 13 years. It's nuts.
It's coming back.
Oh, right, as like a webinar, like it's something new. All right, what's like nails on the chalkboard for presentations when you see somebody, whether it's like an interview or somebody up on stage?
That's in a whole nother presentation.
Like I said earlier, I think, you know, one, when there's so many words on the slide that people are going to start reading the slide rather than looking at you, and you would think that people have learned that by now, but even with seasoned designers, I say, you know, less words, less words, less words. Now, there is the dilemma that you have sometimes where you have what we call a leave behind, right? And so you have to strike a balance sometimes. Or what I've told other people is like, do a separate version for the presentation and then do a different version for the leave behind. You want to add more words there, do it. But the last thing you want are people reading slides while you're talking.
Yeah, and I think it's all about presenting too. Like, I think that's what bothers me the most, is there's like a certain reading voice. Like I don't know if you, whenever you have like you know, there's like commercials where they're like, oh, this is a real customer, and then you can tell that they're reading something. Like, you have to break away from that, and it takes a little while, but that's what super bothers me. And I also, anytime that you start a presentation and you don't set expectations or an agenda, like, what I hate the most is when a client asks a question that's later answered in the deck, and you don't bring them through what they're gonna learn that day. Like, that super bothers me, because, I see it happen all the time, and then you have to do this awkward, like, hold on a sec, hold that thought.
Yeah, I think that's something that none of us covered, was when we're going in to present, like, one of the first slides that we put in our presentations at Altitude is, here's what we're covering, and here's what we're not covering. And we're not talking about all these things. We are talking about this. And then we always close the deck with, here's what happens next. I need this decision. We're delivering this next time. Like, setting those expectations.
Yeah, and just one other tip on the balance between reading and watching you present is, we always use an appendix strategy, right? Because there's always people in the room that their first instinct is to overwhelm the client with evidence, right? And again, that leads to more volume on your slides. And so your appendix, with those people, I always say, let's create an appendix. We'll put that stuff in the back. Don't worry, if we need to reference it, we can, right? So that's another thing that can help you strike the balance.
My biggest pet peeve is starting a presentation with, I'm sorry. Right? You come in for an interview, you're coming in for a pitch, you have technical problems, you say, oh, I'm sorry. Fuck off. Like, I don't really want to hear what you have to say now, because you just delegitimized everything that you're about to tell me, right? So things are going to happen. Get ready for it. It's going to come up. So there's the three of us up here, and Davina's not here. All three of us are actually lecturers or professors. We're all running studios, or like high up in studios, and all of us had our first time on stage at some point. So you've got some knowledge here. Any questions, any thoughts, anything that you guys want to know? How can we help you?
Thank you, Patrick. So, thank you all for all the awesome information so far. Many good quotes. Many good quotes. One of the things I was wondering about is, like, how do you create presentations where you have leaders in your company who also have to jump in and they want to go on a rant, and then the audience wants to ask questions to the leader and they want to keep going. It's like, how do we corral that?
I've had certain situations where, like, I actually tend to like to improvise a little bit. I don't like to rehearse too much, because then I start second guessing myself. But I know some people that really like to improvise, and then they go on tangents, or they'll interrupt me. And so what I tend to, I never try to do it in the meeting, because everything has to be super happy, and, like, oh, everything's great, this was totally planned. But if there's ever a situation in which that kind of repetitively happens, I usually like to be like, okay, next time, it'd be great if you can, like, keep it to this, or go through, have like a pre-meeting in which you talk about, like, what are the talking points that you expect that person to hit, or, I think it's always better to over-communicate, because, everybody in the room has a shared goal of, like, selling this idea. But yeah, that's what I recommend.
So do you mean like when someone more senior than you kind of takes over?
Because you might be the designer to design the deck. Your leadership doesn't know how to do that part.
Right.
They might want you to pitch too and, like, do the opening and run through, but they have their piece.
Right.
Where they're like, I'm going to do this.
Yeah, and that's tough if you're, reporting into them. One way that I would try to manage that, and everyone should do this anyway, which is to have a dress rehearsal for your presentations. And what the problem designers have is time management always, right? And then they end up putting the deck the moment before they present, and no one's talked through any of the slides. What role are you going to take? Blah, blah, blah. Like, at least get a draft of the deck done with you know, even if it's the evening before, where you finally walk through the slides, and some people get really uncomfortable with that, like, I don't want to perform in front of my peers, and, you know, but you can just say, like, what are you going to say on this slide? You know, like, you can just do a voiceover, right? And then it kind of, it might even help train that rambling leader to see what everyone's going to say, make them feel like they don't have to overcompensate so much. Everyone's got this, right? I think sometimes that rambling comes out of lack of trust of your team. So, or just narcissism, which is either one is possible.
Or both.
Or both.
I have a quick one. For the junior designers in the room and those like Sam who want to get in the room, how do you start bringing your team in? What are the things that you allow them to do, or other things that, like Sam did, being relentless, that you suggest that they can do to get in the room? So kind of a dual question.
I mean, yeah. I think that, I think it's always having like if you have one-on-ones with your bosses and you reiterate how important it is for you to hear it firsthand, I say communicate that as much as possible. And then if you are in the room or if you are making presentations, even if it's internally, ask for feedback maybe, because it might be that you're not ready, right? And so you have to be open to the fact that that might be the case. And so asking for feedback, I think, allows for them to know that you're serious, that you're ready, and it will just happen more and more as they trust you.
Yeah, I mean, as someone that leads a studio, and I have a lot of young designers, you know, there's nothing that makes me happier than someone says, I want this, you know? Like, I know you're scared, we all get scared up there, but you still gotta want it. Not to come up with a cheesy sports metaphor, but it's like, if you're a Kobe Bryant fan, you know? Like, he wanted the ball in those final seconds. And you want people that have that sort of courage. So I think maybe some young designers are too deferential and think, oh, well, they're gonna say no to me. But there was nothing that would make me happier for someone 2-3 years out of school to say, I really wanna present the work. I just wanna give it a try here. I would be thrilled with that. I want that kind of bravery and courage. And you know what, if it's, maybe your presentation skills aren't that great, I will make the extra time to work with you so that you feel confident, because that's where your power is. You've got to want it in crunch time.
I think there's also a spot there where if you're mid-level and you've got juniors reporting to you, but you know, then you're reporting to somebody like Jod who's running the show, you still have that opportunity to mentor somebody younger than you, right? Even if they're just pitching the idea to you, you take that and say, well, tell me the story, right? Like, you can coach them and guide them into how to give a presentation just to you. And I typically do it around the terms of, I need you to give me the language to sell this. I need you to download your brain to me. Start talking to me about it, because what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go download your brain to the next person. And in doing that, I'm able to see, wait, this kid actually has skills, they just don't know how to say it, or they don't have the guts, or the confidence to say, I wanna do this. And so, design sucks. You need a champion to be a good designer. And so at every step in the process, you can be a champion for the person next to you or that you're supporting. So just step in and do it.
I have an observation and a question. My observation is that I see my fair share of presentations, and I just came back from Adobe Max, so I saw a lot of them. One thing is establishing Q&A after your presentation, and so people don't hijack it. I see that a lot, and I usually lose my train of thought, or when it's like hijacked. But my question is, about 3 years ago, I started doing more public speaking. I was kind of thrown into it. But as someone who wants to do more speaking, how do you solicit yourself, and how do you put yourself out there that you can put out your expertise for maybe people that are less experienced?
There's a call for proposals right now for the Adobe Design Educators Conference. Propose. Right? Look for every opportunity that there is and put your name out there. It's like you have to do the work for it, right? It's just like when you're starting out your own company and pitching, like nobody's going to come to you and say, hey, Michael, you're a great presenter, even though I've never heard from you because you've never done this before, right? It's a whole new skill set. You got to go out there and start pitching and start selling yourself that same way.
I mean, I can only speak as a former programming director. I realized that like we were always asking the same people who know how to do this already, and so I always made it a point to ask someone who I know will bring down the house, but also someone who's never done it before, but I, worked with them, or someone has worked with them, and they're competent at, speaking in general. So, I mean, I would say like AIGA is a good place to start, like, as you get to know people, and I know that like, oh yeah, that person does that work, and I met them at an event, and so therefore I recommend them. So that's just my 2 cents.
I would say, find something that you are emotionally connected to, that you're passionate about, and that you want to make an argument out in the world. I mean, I like to talk with my designers that every design decision is an argument. Why does it say refined by on the search field? Why is that there? There has to be a purpose for everything, right? But I digress. I think it's thinking about something that you feel there's a gap, like no one's talking about, and when you organically find that material, the speaking opportunities will come, because you're not doing it to sound cool on LinkedIn, right? Like you're talking about things that matter to you.
Awesome, we have one right here actually. And I do want to say to Michael and anyone else who's interested in speaking in front of an audience as a designer, if you have typography-based work, then you can come to Type Thursday LA and present it.
Hey John, so you mentioned in your presentation about speaking about the client and rather than yourself. How would you go about speaking where you're not like kind of putting them in this like awkward position where you're like kind of talking at them? Like how would you go about it where you're humbly talking about them and hey, I think you guys need help with this, but not being like you guys suck.
Yeah, you guys suck probably wouldn't go very well, but no, that's a good question, because yeah, even when you're in a consultant context, there's a little bit of I'm the expert, but a really good consultant will tell you that, again, go back to listening, right? Like there's no one answer for everything, and who's really an expert when the world is changing this fast all the time? But I would say understand their worldview, right? It's not about, here's what you need all the time. It's like, if you can just mirror what their perspective is, like how they see the world, you can do it without saying, you guys are the star, right? Like it's more subtle than that. And so, again, when you're doing stakeholder interviews and you're early on a project, really, like one of the questions I often ask during stakeholder interviews is, what keeps you up at night? Like, what are you most worried about? That's emotional stuff that you can leverage in your communication. So, but you don't have to say, well, remember on slide 1, you said you were most worried about this. No, it's more subtle.
Yeah, I think I was in the crazy Boston trip where we were meeting all the time. I got to know them pretty well, and it was easy for me to say, like whenever I had a design decision that I was defending, I would say, Maureen, I heard you say this, that you were concerned about this, or I think this would be helpful for your team. If you're able to make that personal and have them understand that that you were listening, and it's not just like you kind of busting through the door with design solutions. I think that's more helpful. I mean, it's a lot of, like I said, it's a lot of work, but I think it's easier.
Yeah. So back to listening, one last point, and this is listening is a practice that you can embody. And the reason I get so obsessed with it is probably because I'm not natively a very good listener. So you work on the things that you're not good at. But there is a framework that I leverage, and I try to reference it when I am in the act of listening. And there are these 3 stages, right? So the first stage is, I'm really not listening. I'm just kind of waiting for your mouth to stop moving so that I can say the thing in my head that I'm waiting to say, right? It's kind of how 50% of how most conversations go. And then the second level deep is kind of like, you're talking, I'm kind of like confirming most of it. I know most of what you're saying, but every now and then you'll say something that kind of like fills a gap in my knowledge, and I'm listening for those gaps, but I'm still listening from my perspective. I'm still seeing the world from my worldview, and you're simply filling the gaps in my worldview. Then there's this dynamic precipice that you cross over into, where you really start listening with a complete sense of openness, and you're listening from the clients or whoever is the speaker, you're listening from their perspective, right? Would that require some kind of degree of regulating your self-talk and just being empty? Like, don't think about what you're gonna say when the gap comes. Just sit with it, like genuinely listen. And as you do, you start to see how they see the world. You see beyond the words that are coming out of their mouth. You start to observe body language. All those things that are embodied communication, which 80% or more is nonverbal. So I hope that's a helpful framework. And the next time you're in the act of listening, try to sort of diagnose yourself on that scale. And when you get to that stage 3, you can really make some dynamic change.
How many, who are the board members and advisory board members in the room right now? So for everybody else, I want you to look around at those hands, please. If you have questions, if you have more thoughts, if you have more things that you want to know about this or anything else, these people here are the resource in Los Angeles for those answers. We are all putting ourselves out there to be a part of the community and to be somebody that you can continue these conversations with or ask these questions. Our community meetings where we come out to other areas of the city are to make sure that we're connecting to parts of the community that we don't see on our third Wednesdays. And so that's why we're here. I say that openly and honestly. Amanda and I talk to our board and our advisory board all the time to re-emphasize that we're all here for you. So please, if you have any questions, if you have any thoughts, if you want guidance, we are a group of people that you can reach out to, that you can ask questions of. And you know, design is a hard gig, the creative world's a hard gig, so you know, finding people that you can talk to is a really good thing. Please give a hand to Sam and to John.